Daria deliberately left her bank card at home when she went with her husband to a restaurant for her mother-in-law's anniversary. Instead of her wallet, a mousetrap was in her bag. When the bill exceeded $300,000, her mother-in-law loudly declared, quote, "Zero." Following this, she immediately reached into my bag and cried out in pain. "Before we continue, please tell me what country you are from and how old you are. Enjoy the story." Daria rushed from work, as usual, cutting it a bit close. The December evening had already darkened, but warm lights glowed in the windows of houses, bringing a sense of peace to her soul. She thought about the simplest things. Getting home, changing, picking up the gift she'd hidden on the top shelf of her closet, and heading to the restaurant for her mother-in-law's anniversary celebration. It seemed like a typical family event, a celebration like any other. Yet, for some reason, in recent years, the word family had increasingly evoked not joy, but weariness in Daria. She had been married to Artyom for 12 years. It had long since passed the stage of passionate love and flowers, evolving into a life sustained by habit, routine, and the unspoken question of who was carrying the heavier burden. Daria worked as an accountant in a small but stable company. Her salary was decent, allowing for comfort without extravagance. Artyom, too, was employed as a purchasing manager, constantly engaged in calls, negotiations, and travel. On the surface, they appeared to be a normal family, with an apartment, a car, an annual vacation, and regular family gatherings for holidays. However, one persistent question had long occupied Daria's mind. Why was Artyom's concept of family always centered on his mother, while hers seemed to revolve solely around obligations? Her relationship with Lyudmila Pavlovna, her mother-in-law, was outwardly cordial. Her mother-in-law was adept at smiling and uttering the right words. "Dasha, you're such a clever girl. Dasha, we're counting on you. Dasha, you understand." And these pronouncements were invariably followed by requests that Daria found difficult to accept. We need help. We need to pay. We need to yield. We need to be patient. Daria had endured these demands. Not out of weakness, but because in her youth, she believed this was how families were built, through compromise, smoothing over difficulties, and avoiding confrontation. Later, the habit of not arguing formed. Then came the weariness, and with it, a quiet, persistent feeling. I'm being used, and everyone pretends it's perfectly normal. Lyudmila Pavlovna's anniversary was meant to be a proper celebration, held at a restaurant with music, relatives, and a photographer. For the entire week prior, Artyom had been buoyant, as if he were the one celebrating his birthday. He enthusiastically described the dishes ordered, the hired host, and the elaborate cake. The word, quote, 5 was frequently on his lips. Quote 6, quote 7, quote 8. Daria listened and nodded, but internally she noted that she had never heard him utter the word, quote 9 or quote 10. Artyom skillfully avoided discussions about expenses. Daria recognized this tactic. If the cost wasn't mentioned, it was easier to feign ignorance later, as if there were no other option. Previously, she hadn't pressed the issue. This time, she also refrained from pressing. She simply began to observe. 2 days before the anniversary, Daria went to the kitchen late at night for a drink of water. The hallway light was off, and she navigated almost by touch. Artyom's voice drifted from his room. He was on the phone. Daria considered coughing to let him know she was there, but stopped herself. There was something in his voice, a mixture of guilt and cheerfulness, like someone making excuses while trying to appear heroic. "Mom, don't worry," Artyom said, lowering his voice. "It'll all happen. I told you she'll pay." "Yes?" "Well, we won't announce it directly, but you'll say something nice at the end, so everyone hears. Something like, 'Our daughter-in-law is so generous she won't refuse in front of everyone. What choice does she have? She's such a good girl.'" Daria froze. The glass in her hand felt heavy as stone. She even thought her heart had stopped for a couple of seconds. Artyom, meanwhile, continued, "No, Mom. No need for unnecessary talk. The main thing is that she brings her bag. She'll bring it. Where else would she go? I'll tell her it's just in case. That's all, Mom. Don't get worked up. Let's talk tomorrow." Daria quietly turned and went back to the bedroom. She didn't slam the door, didn't cause a scene, didn't cry. She simply lay down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. So that was it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a coincidence that she ended up paying. It was a plan. And she was part of that plan. Not even a person, but a tool. In the morning, Daria woke up as usual, made porridge, brewed tea, and woke Artyom. He was affectionate, cheerful, and joked. He kissed her cheek and said, "Dasha, you're my golden girl. Mom will be overjoyed today. Let's just have a good celebration without any fuss, okay?" Daria smiled, a quiet, serene smile. "Of course," she said. A celebration. On this day, she did everything a little slower than usual. At work, she finalized urgent papers in advance to avoid being late. Then, she stopped at a small hardware store to buy a couple of items for their country house. Their dacha was small and old, more of a personal retreat. Mice often appeared there, especially in winter. Daria routinely picked up a few spring-loaded simple mousetraps. The shopkeeper even asked if she needed any bait. Daria replied, "No, thank you." On the way home, her thoughts weren't on the restaurant, but on how life sometimes presents one with a choice. Not loudly, not dramatically. Simply at one moment, you realize that if you remain silent again, you won't be able to respect yourself anymore. At home, Daria opened her closet, took out dresses, shoes, and placed the gift for her mother-in-law in a bag. Then, she opened the bedside table where her wallet and bank cards lay. She looked at them, and with a sudden sense of shame, put her wallet back. Not because she wanted to create a scene for anyone, but because the thought of someone rummaging through her bag as if it were perfectly normal suddenly disgusted her. She had intentionally left her card at home, but she placed a single mousetrap in her bag. Not at the bottom, not deep inside, but positioned so that if someone reached in without permission, they would immediately encounter an unpleasant surprise. The mousetrap was clean and new. Daria even thought, the main thing is not to cause any real harm. She understood. This isn't a weapon. It's a signal. At 6 in the evening, Artyom arrived in his car, impeccably dressed in a suit and tie, wearing cologne. "Beautiful," he said, seeing Daria in her dress. "All right, let's go. Mom's already there, and the others are arriving." Daria got into the car silently. The drive to the restaurant took about 20 minutes. Artyom recounted how relatives had already begun asking, "When are you two?" Daria listened and looked out the window. Snow lay in neat drifts along the roadside. The trees stood dark, like etchings. Inside the restaurant, it was lively and bright. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Lyudmila Pavlovna sat at the head of the table in a new cherry-red dress, her hair styled and adorned with earrings. Seeing Daria, she smiled broadly. "Oh, Dasha, you look so lovely. I told Artyom you were—" She paused, narrowing her eyes. "Special," Daria responded politely. "Happy birthday, Lyudmila Pavlovna. I wish you good health." The gift was accepted, cheeks were kissed, all as expected. They sat down. There were about 15 people at the table. Artyom's extended family, cousins, second cousins, some with spouses, some with children. Everyone was loud and cheerful, and for some reason, they all seemed convinced that the daughter-in-law was essentially serving staff. Daria answered calmly. She didn't argue. She observed. The bill grew subtly, like snow accumulating on a roof. It seemed small at first, then suddenly substantial. Appetizers, hot salads, fish, meat, desserts were ordered. Lyudmila Pavlovna perused the menu like the mistress of her own destiny. "Oh, please, order whatever you like. It's a celebration. We live only once." Artyom laughed, chimed in, and on a couple of occasions skillfully avoided Daria's gaze as if trying to evade an unnecessary encounter. When the cake arrived, a large, beautiful creation adorned with the number 62, everyone stood up, applauded, and shouted, "quote_31." Daria also stood, smiled, and offered her congratulations. It seemed the celebration might now wind down with tea, cake, and guests departing. However, Lyudmila Pavlovna was a person who relished a dramatic finale. Quote, 32. She announced, after the cake had been cut and served. Quote, 33. She raised her glass and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. Quote, 34. She turned her head towards Daria. Quote, 35. Her voice became saccharine. Quote, 36. For a moment, silence descended upon the table. Even the music seemed to soften. Several people smiled, someone snickered, another pretended it was a joke. Artyom sat beside Daria, looking at her as if expecting her to magically save them all, and do so elegantly. Daria didn't rush. She placed her cup on the table, calmly wiped her lips with a napkin, and looked at Lyudmila Pavlovna. "Lyudmila Pavlovna," she said evenly, "I pay for my own orders." "What do you mean?" The smile remained on her face, but it became strained. "Well, this is family. Family is when you ask," Daria replied, "not when decisions are made behind your back." Lyudmila Pavlovna stiffened abruptly. "Dasha." "What are you saying?" Her voice grew harsh. "Do you want to disgrace me in front of everyone?" Daria looked at Artyom. His eyes pleaded, "Come on, not now." But Daria suddenly felt an extraordinary sense of peace. The kind that settles when you've made a decision, and nothing else feels frightening. Quote 45, she said. Quote 46. And at that moment, Lyudmila Pavlovna did what Daria had anticipated, though she had hoped it wouldn't happen. Her mother-in-law abruptly stood, walked around the table, and reached for Daria's bag, which was hanging on the back of her chair. She hissed. Daria didn't even have time to say anything. Lyudmila Pavlovna had already thrust her hand into the bag. Suddenly, a sharp metallic click echoed, short and loud, like a gunshot in the silence. Her mother-in-law cried out, not in tragedy, but in surprise and pain. She snatched her hand back instantly, clutching her fingers to her palm. Her eyes widened. Someone at the table gasped. Someone else jumped up, and voices began to ask, "What is it? What happened?" Daria stood up and with calm movements retrieved the mousetrap from her bag. The spring had already sprung. She placed it on the edge of the table as evidence. "This is called personal boundaries," she said quietly. "You don't go pawing through my belongings." Lyudmila Pavlovna stood trembling with anger and humiliation. She wanted to scream, but the pain in her fingers and her shock prevented her from finding words immediately. You, she stammered. "You're crazy." Artyom sprang up. "Dasha, what have you done? She's your mother. Your mother." Daria looked at him very intently, as if seeing him for the first time. "Artyom," she said calmly, "your mother reached into my bag without permission. Did you see that?" "What difference does it make?" he exclaimed. "She's your mother." "Exactly," Daria said quietly. "She's a grown woman. She should know that what belongs to others is theirs." A waitress, Nina, rushed to the table with a first aid kit. She quickly took Lyudmila Pavlovna's hand and examined her fingers. Nina said confidently. Her mother-in-law hissed. Nina looked up at Daria, not with judgment, but with understanding. as if she had seen this scenario before. Someone being pressured into paying and then blamed. Underscore, quote underscore 64. Underscore the administrator intervened, approaching the table. Quote 65. Well, Lyudmila Pavlovna, you ordered everything yourself. Quote 66. And really, why stick your hand in a bag? Quote 67. Let's chip in. Why not? Then Sergei Ivanovich, Artyom's uncle, a quiet elderly man who had sat calmly all evening and spoken very little, stood up. He rose slowly, like someone who disliked interfering, but if he stood, it meant business. Lyudmila, he said softly, but in a way that silenced everyone. What are you doing? His mother-in-law turned to him, her lips pressed together. Seryozha, you don't understand. She has to. She doesn't have to do anything, Sergei Ivanovich cut her off. It's your anniversary. You ordered. You pay. And if you didn't have enough money, you should have asked in advance, not made a scene. Artyom tried to interject. Uncle Seryozha. Well, You be quiet, Sergei Ivanovich snapped. A man, they call you. You shouldn't treat your wife like this. First you promised Mom that your wife would pay, and now you're standing there with your mouth agape. Shameful. Daria felt something release inside her. Not joy, but relief. She didn't want triumph. She wanted things to be set right. In the end, the bill was paid thus. A portion by Artyom from his card. A portion by Lyudmila Pavlovna in cash, which she found in her bag. The rest was covered by relatives chipping in to end the scandal quickly. The celebration ended abruptly, as if the music had been turned off. On the drive home, Artyom was silent for about 10 minutes. Then he exploded. Do you realize what you've done? You embarrassed Mom. You embarrassed me. Did you do it on purpose? Artyom, you embarrassed yourself, not me. Quote 79. You're just greedy, he shouted. You have money. What did it cost you? Daria turned to him. This isn't about money. It's about you conspiring with Mom behind my back. It's about them wanting to present me with a fait accompli. It's about your mother rummaging through my bag. And you think I'm the one to blame. So what now? Are you satisfied? From now on, things will be different. From this day forward, all expenses will be by agreement. Not you must, because it's family. Family is about respect. Artyom tried to scoff. Are you giving me ultimatums? Daria sighed. Artyom, I'm not issuing ultimatums. I'm setting boundaries. Those are two different things. He sat down and rubbed his face with his hands. You're just overreacting. Mom, she's used to things. Let her get used to things differently, Daria said calmly. And you too. The night was difficult, but without any arguments. Artyom went to sleep in another room. Daria sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking. She felt sorry for her past self, the one who had swallowed her pride for so many years to avoid conflict. But the pity wasn't bitter. It was warm, as if she were saying, well, girl, you did the best you could. The next morning Lyudmila Pavlovna called early. Her voice was icy. Dasha, she said. I hope you understand that yesterday you crossed every line, Daria replied softly. Yesterday, for the first time, I actually defined them. You hurt me? Her mother-in-law's voice rose. You hurt me before, Daria replied. Not with my finger, but with your attitude. Lyudmila Pavlovna fell silent for a second, then said abruptly, I told Artyom to decide. Either you or the family. Daria chuckled sadly. Family is husband and wife, she said. If Artyom chooses either/or, it means he hasn't understood what family means. I visited Mom. She said that you humiliated her. And what did you say? I said that we need to reconcile somehow. Artyom, reconciliation is possible when there is guilt, And I have no guilt. I have weariness and a decision. I will no longer live as if I have no right to speak. And what do you want? A divorce? I want respect. If you can't give it, then yes, we'll separate. Not out of spite, simply because it can't go on like this. These words affected Artyom more than any argument. He was accustomed to Daria's tolerance. Now she spoke calmly, without hysterics, without threats. Like an adult. This was more frightening. The following week revealed a great deal. Lyudmila Pavlovna tried to exert pressure through relatives, through pity, through reproaches. Artyom wavered. Sometimes he seemed to understand that he had gone too far. Other times, he reverted to being the son whose mother's happiness was paramount. Daria made no drastic moves. She opened a separate bank account, transferred a portion of her savings to it, gathered her documents, and spoke with a lawyer. Calmly, without drama, not to punish, but to understand how to protect herself. She began saving for the future and stopped making excuses. And then something remarkable happened. As soon as Daria ceased to be compliant, the clamor around her quieted. Relatives stopped calling about trivial matters. Her mother-in-law stopped paying friendly visits. Artyom began to do something he rarely did. He started to reflect. One evening he said, "You know, I realized that Mom was really going too far." Daria looked at him calmly. "The question is different, Artyom," she said. "Are you ready to be a husband? Or have you always considered your wife to be an appendage to your mother?" Artyom was silent for a long time, then quietly replied, "I don't know. But I know. I will no longer live in I don't know." A month later, they agreed to live separately for a time. Artyom moved in with his mother. Daria remained in the apartment. There were no loud scenes, no war. It was an adult, difficult decision. On the last evening before Artyom packed his belongings, he stood in the hallway and suddenly said, "Dasha, if you had paid then, everything would have been fine." Daria looked at him and replied softly, "No, Artyom. If I had paid then, everything would have been as it always was." And as it always was slowly killing me, drop by drop. He left. The door closed quietly. Daria was alone. She turned on the kitchen light and made herself some tea. And for the first time in many years, she felt not emptiness, but relief. Not because she had won, but because she had finally stopped betraying herself. A few months later, Artyom tried to return, brought flowers, said the right words, and promised everything would be different. Daria listened and asked only one thing. "Have you spoken to Mom? Have you set boundaries with her?" Artyom hesitated. "Well, I don't want to argue with her. Then I'll be argued with my entire life," she said, "and I don't want that anymore. It's funny how a small metal device in my bag became the turning point where my life changed." On New Year's Eve, Sergei Ivanovich called Daria. "Dasha," he said, "I just wanted to say you did the right thing yesterday, and forgive us for staying silent before." "We saw it," Daria replied. "Thank you, Sergei Ivanovich. But the important thing is that I'm not silent anymore. Life doesn't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the most important turning point is when you simply say no, calmly, on time, and forever.